All right, welcome everyone. How's everyone doing? Glad you all could be here. Today we have a wonderful program for you. We have Al Ludtke here. He is going to be talking about the fairy moths in the genus Adela. But before we get going with that, I just want to mention a few things in case you've never attended one of our chapter meetings before, you're unfamiliar with CMPS. My name's Shane Hanafi. I'm the president of the Redbud chapter, which is one of 35 chapters of the California Native Plant Society. We represent Western Nevada and Placer counties, and we champion the native plants that are found within them. If you're not a member, we really encourage you to become one. There's lots of perks, including a really big one that I'm going to be mentioning in a second here. But certainly we offer all sorts of field trips, workshops like the one you are in attendance for right now, programs. We can give you gardening help. We have our plant sale. There's a bunch of different ways to interact with us. I do encourage you check out our website. Our website has lots of wonderful resources on gardening tips and conservation news, and absolutely go check that out. I believe Chrissy here will throw the link to that in the chat. Also check us out on Facebook. We have a page there. We also have a group. If you join the Facebook group, you can post pictures of plants you want help identified. You can ask questions about native plant gardening, or just nerd out with other plant nerds. Check us out on Instagram. We're at Redbud CMPS, and we have a YouTube page where this video will be posted. We have our past programs on there, virtual hikes hosted by yours truly, and a mishmash.
Oh. That's not good. Lost him right off the bat. What happened?
It looks like Shane has some technical difficulties, so if you hold on a minute, we'll get it sorted out. Thank you.
While Shane is getting everything all set up, this is Chrissy. I could remind you all or tell you that Redbud has another program coming up at the end of March. On March 31st, we will have Julie Kierstad, who is an amazing expert on native plants of California, giving a program called How to Find and Name New Plant Species. It'll be at 6 o'clock on March 31st. We have a little write-up about it and a link to the Zoom and YouTube connections for that up on our website under calendar/events. And Julie is someone who has been very involved in discovering new species of native plants, and she will talk about her examples of how new species are discovered. For people who've wondered about that, you're like, wait, things do not stay the same. She'll give us some clues about why that happens. She'll also talk about some of the places you're more likely to find new species for those people who know enough to go, oh, well, I have pretty good sense of California native plant botany ID. Let me go see what I can find. And then how to figure out when you found a new species. And then, oh my gosh, all the steps involved in naming a new species. And who decides, well, is this really a new species or not? Who knew that that was so complicated? But you know what? It also helps us trust that when there's a new species announced, it's really a new species. So now we'll get to see behind the curtain. And I'm sure the photography will be gorgeous. Julie is a marvelous, marvelous native plant photographer. So I think we will all really benefit from that. It will be exquisite. We have more presentations coming up. later in the year, we'll post them on our website and on our Facebook page, and we'll talk to you about more when we know more later. So while Shane is working
Chrissy?
on things, yes, I see that, yes. While Shane is working on that, let me then give you a little bit of information and introduce our host tonight, pardon me, our speaker tonight, Al Ludtke. Al he has a degree in botany from UC Davis, and he has been studying butterflies and moths since he was, imagine this, 12 years old. And here he is, someone who has been able to go out and study a particular genus of Lepidoptera. And he even has a moth that's named for him because of the contributions he's made in this field. A lot of the photographs that we're going to see this evening are by Lisa Cooper, who works with Al on the study of the fairy moths. And she's a veterinarian by trade, meaning, hello, she's very aligned with the fauna of the world. And she is someone who does a lot of native of photography of all aspects of nature. And she likes to go out in nature, as of course Al does too, because you have to go where the species are. Pardon me while I mute that. I'm going to now start recording this. Let me go back to where I can do that. Shane's having technical difficulties, not of his making. And let me see how I can do that. You're going to have to pardon me for a moment. Okay, got it. Okay, so now we are recording. And so now that we are recording and I've introduced Al, I am so excited to present Al Ludtke and the California Adela species and their plants. Al, welcome. Oh, by the way, we'll take questions via the chat. So if you have a question for Al or for Lisa about photography, this kind of photography, put them in the chat and they will answer your questions after the program. Thank you. Al.
Thank you for the introduction. That was more than I expected, Christy. One little correction, I do not have a degree in botany. I have a degree in entomology, so I really don't consider myself an expert botanist, but you guys in the Native Plant Society have taught me a lot. I really appreciate that. So let's get started with the moths here. The family Adelidae is a worldwide family of moths. In North America, we have one subfamily and three genera so far known. We're focusing just on the genus Adela. And in California, I'm only going to talk about the species in California for this talk. In California, we have 8 described species and plus some others that have not yet been described. And these 8 species there are pairs of them that are closely related, and then there are a couple that are dissimilar from all the others. Trigrapha and eldorada here on the upper left is a pair of closely related adelids. Thorpella and oplerella are closely related. Singulella and punctiforella are closely related. Septentrionella is kind of unique, and flammusella is closely related to an undescribed species, but none of the other ones. I'm going to talk about the moths and their plants, and the relationships of the moths and the relationships of the plants and relationships of each other, and the implications of that for botanical systematics. And let's get started here. So here are the 8 described species. And just generally, I'll make a few general comments about the genus Adela that are not species specific. They are day-flying moths. They love flowers. So they're denizens of bright sunshine. So you will find them in a great diversity of habitats wherever there are flowers and lots of sunshine. So, a few examples of places around California, you can find them. They're little studied, but if you know what to look for, you will find them. They're common and widespread. Lisa's been introduced. She took most of these photographs. I'm really fortunate to have her participate in this because she's been a tremendous help. She's discovered a lot of things, and she's a great photographer. She discovered this site right here in Shingle Springs, which is the most diverse place in the state for species of Adela. There are 5 species of Adela found in this place. The next most diverse place has 4 species. To get an idea what we're talking about here and the size of these things, they're small, but generally about 10 millimeters wingspan, more or less. And here's one on my thumb or forefinger, I've forgotten which it is. And this is a flammusella, a typical size of a Adela. We don't know much at all about the biologies of the North American species, but the European species are better known. But what we do know about the North American species is consistent with the European ones. And one of the consistencies is that they lay their eggs into the ovaries of the flowers. They pierce the ovary and deposit the egg inside the ovary, where the first stage of the caterpillar eats the developing ovules. And this is an ovipositor that you can see it's designed for piercing of flammusella. That happens to be that one. They are gregarious. The males form swarms in the air and they dance around each other. They're also called fairy moths, longhorn moths, longhorn because of the long antennae. Fairy moths, I suppose, because of their bobbing kind of flight pattern. So on the left there is a picture of septentrionella with 4 of them flying together, but there are probably a lot more than that because they're small. It's hard to get a group of them all in focus, and you can actually get 4 in focus, so it's probably more. In the middle, there's thorpella on its host plant. I'm going to have pictures later and just naming these plants, and hopefully, if you don't know the plants, the pictures will enable you to recognize them. But we'll get to that. This is thorpella, being gregarious, and on the here there's eldorada being gregarious. There are 6 of them in this picture. One there, one there, one there, one there, one there, one there. So the first species I want to talk about is septentrionella. A male and a female. The female here is septentrionella uses holodiscus discolor as its ovipositional substrate, and that's the only plant that it uses as an ovipositional substrate as far as we know. The female on the right is not on holodiscus discolor. It's just taking nectar from any good nectar source. This is holodiscus discolor. Holodiscus discolor is found from about sea level up to over 8,000 feet, and the moth has been recorded at about 8,000 feet. But try as we might, Lisa and I have not been able to find that moth over about, I think it's about 3,500 feet. Although the plant is common and widespread, it might be a different species up there. There's some disagreement about that. So we don't know what's going on. We don't know if the moth has been extirpated from the high elevations, or we're just not looking on the right plant at those elevations. This is septentrionella laying an egg into the bud of the unopened flowers of its host. When they lay their eggs, they curl their abdomen down, touch the tip of their abdomen, and then pierce into the flower with that long ovipositor and lay at least one egg. We don't know how many they're laying at one sitting. And we have a little video of all that happening. It was kind of a windy day, sorry for this, but at least you can see the behavior. She walks around, tests with her abdomen until she finds a spot she likes, and then digs in deeper and lays an egg. And then she'll repeat that. She'll leave the bud and come back and repeat it. Oops, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Little is known about the life histories. Typically, and probably in every case, in the genus Adela, the caterpillar will leave the ovary of the flower after its first or second stage. I'm going to call it molts from now on because that's the term, but anyway, that's what a molt is, a stage of a caterpillar when they shed their skins. After the first or second molt, they will leave the ovary and feed externally on the host plant or on any other plant on the ground. They, in our Mediterranean climate, they mostly feed on annual plants, but the caterpillars go through the whole summer. So by the time the adult caterpillars, they've been eating dead leaves on the ground. And once it's on the ground, they will eat just about anything, according to the habits with the European species. We don't know. We've never seen a caterpillar. This is the only image we have of any caterpillars. And it's they build themselves a silken case and stick their head and thorax out and crawl around with their front legs in the fashion of a clothes moth, but they're not clothes moths. So specifically, oh, by the way, this last image was published in the Hibiscus of the Native Plant Society, and just coincidentally, Jerry Powell wrote an article about caterpillars on plants and the different lifestyles, and he included that picture. I had to lift a couple of pictures out of his book because I don't have any of my own. So singulella, of the first pair, Singulella and Punctiferella. Singulella has two known host plants, both in the genus Gilia. There's Achillifolia and there's a capitata. Here's a male on the left, we think that's Achillifolia. And then on the right, there's a female laying an egg into the unopened inflorescence of capitata. Here are some other pictures of Achillifolia, small inflorescence, a large inflorescence, and then leaves of the plant. Try to include some leaves so if you're looking for the plant, you'll be able to recognize it. Capitata, inflorescence and leaves. Capitata is quite a common plant in this part of the Sierras. It blooms in May or so, I guess. May, June. Okay. Punctiferella, the other species in that pair, uses other species of Gilia, namely tricolor, the bird's eye Gilia, and scrophule, what's the name? I'll get to it. We don't have an image of an oviposition of what we know for sure is Punctiferella. This may be the best we could do. And the reason we don't have an image is because we kind of quit because we thought we had an image. But here is tricolor, Gilia tricolor, beautiful plant. And here is scopulorum. That's in the deserts of Southern California, they use scopulorum and leaves, flowers. So this is the image that we've given this talk before. And this is the image we used and called it Punctiferella because it's laying an egg into Gilia tricolor. And Singulella is not known to use Gilia tricolor. But the more I looked at that picture, the more uncomfortable I got with that because it looks more like Singulella. So this picture was taken in an area where Singulella and Punctiferella overlap their ranges slightly and overlap their flight period slightly. So they have the opportunity to mate with each other. Well, I have that specimen, and on closer examination, that specimen is intermediate between Punctiferella and Singulella in every aspect where they typically differ. So then what I'm trying to say is that the systematics of this group is not entirely settled. The next pair is thorpella and oplerella. Is thorpella, male on the left, female on the right. On its host plant, its primary host plant is cream cups. And here it is, Platystemon californicus, plant and flowers. Here the females are laying eggs, two females laying eggs in the ovary of the cream cups. Typically, Adelids will lay their eggs into the ovary from underneath the petals because the ovary of those flowers is more accessible that way. But with the Papaveraceae, that's not the case. So they reach down into the ovary from above. This one on the right is a very atypical specimen. I included it just because it's kind of strange. It's probably just an aberration, but we really don't know what it is. It's got to be something related to thorpella, and it probably is thorpella. Anyway, it's laying an egg, so it seems like a good picture. The cream cups is the primary host, but thorpella has also been found associated with Micropus, and we have 3 species of Micropus in California, and the literature doesn't state which species that the moths have been associated with. Oviposition has not been seen on anything but the Platystemon, but it is likely that they also use the Micropus, Denticulata, Californica, Oregana, as well as Hesperomericon. I'm not a botanist. The moths have not been found in association with that, but they're not as widespread as some of the other species of Adela. And this is such a closely related plant that we suspect they'll eventually be found using that plant as well. These cream cups and these other genera are in the Papaveraceae, as is the California poppies and all these species of poppies in California. This is the frying pan poppy. Well, when we're out looking for moths, we're trying to discover new relationships between the plants and the animals. And so we're always looking for plants that might be a host. We looked and looked and looked and never could find moths using anything but those known plants until Lisa last year found them laying eggs on the frying pan poppies in where there was no cream cups, but there was some cream cups maybe a few hundred yards away. There were California poppies mixed in with the frying pan poppies. They paid no attention to the California poppies, but they laid eggs on the frying pan poppies. So the other species in this group is the oplerella. Oplerella has only known to use Platystemon californicus as a host. And there is a male on the left, a female on the right. They're very similar to thorpella. The antennae are shorter than thorpella. The eyes of the male are smaller than thorpella. It is definitely a different species. Repeat of the same host plant because it is the same. Here we have 2 pictures of, at least they can make most of these pictures. What are the captions anyway? What happened? In Marin County, that we found them laying eggs. Yeah, this was in a place probably their type locality. I don't know what happened to the captions on that one. Okay, the next group, Adela, eldorada and trigrapha. This is where it starts to get complicated. Eldorada and trigrapha are closely related, and some people believe them to be conspecific. Lisa and I are kind of stubborn, and we don't think so, but we're not really so sure anymore. Here's a male on the left, it's taking nectar from a gentiana, and on the right, another male sitting on its host, one of its hosts, Erythranthe bicolor. And here's the plant. There are two hosts for eldorada. One of them is Erythranthe gudita there, and the other one's Erythranthe bicolor. I try to encourage people to go looking for the things because they're such delightful little moths. And once you know what you're looking for, they're so easy to find, and it's satisfying to go out and be successful if you're looking for them. Well, I took this picture off the internet, and I didn't mean to include any moths in it, but there is actually a moth on an eldorada moth right there in this picture. I don't know if the photographer knew that, but that's the point I'm trying to make, is that they're so common that you can take pictures of them accidentally. Here is eldorada ovipositing on gudita on the left, piercing through the calyx into the ovary, and on the right, bicolor. Okay, trigrapha is the other member of this pair. I'm calling it a pair, but actually it's probably more than one species. The male on the left, female on the right. Trigrapha and eldorada are the two most sexually dimorphic species in the genus in California. The females are smaller than the males. They have shorter, broader wings. The antennae are much shorter than the males, and the females have this bluish sheen that the males lack. Trigrapha and flammeusella are prone to melanism. So you can see there's just like one stripe and little traces of the other, whereas typically there are more stripes. And we were pretty sure that at least with flammeusella, the melanism is induced by moisture in the soil. Moisture soil yields darker moths. Jeannie took this picture from down in the San Joaquin Valley of this moth that we don't know what it is. It might be a melanic trigrapha, but it's quite an interesting specimen because it lacks the three stripes, but otherwise it's paler than trigrapha. Trigrapha's antennae are darker, banded near the base. These antennae are completely white. Trigrapha has dark legs. This specimen has white legs. The wings of this specimen appear to be narrower and more pointed than trigrapha. So it's quite an intriguing specimen, and we hope to find a population of them, but we don't know if this is just an individual aberration or what it is. And these are the sort of things that a person will discover if they're studying Adelas, because there's so little known and there's so many of them. Opportunities abound. Okay. Trigrapha was originally known to utilize the genus Leptosiphon as an ovipositional substrate, but we have it has now been observed. We haven't observed it on anything but Micropus californicus, but others have observed it on Lasthenia, and here's the Micropus californicus Q-tips. And Paul Johnson has been studying these things too. Observed the oviposition on Collinsia. Here are the two species of Leptosiphon that Jerry Powell in the 1960s observed oviposition upon, and which we have not been able to repeat. Paul had also observed oviposition on this Boraginaceae, but he didn't get a picture of it, unfortunately. So here we have trigrapha ovipositing on Micropus californicus, Lasthenia, and Collinsia. And note that these are not in the same family as Leptosiphon. Here's the picture I had to lift from the book that I don't know who took the picture, but it's Jerry's book. Jerry Powell and Paul Opler had a book of Western North American moths. And he got this picture of it ovipositing on Leptosiphon. As far as I know, it's only been observed in Santa Clara County and Marin County, but it's not an imagination. We were looking for, we're trying in our attempt to get photos of all the different species of ovipositing. We were looking on the Leptosiphon because that was a known host, and going to different places where we could find Leptosiphon. We found a bunch of Leptosiphon, and moths weren't paying any attention to it. So, but we're still looking around, and all of a sudden we found a bunch of moths where there was a bunch of Micropus, and lo and behold, they were ignoring the Leptosiphon and ovipositing into the Micropus. So I took this picture later of a little patch of Leptosiphon and Micropus intermingled. Here's some Leptosiphon there. Aren't any moths in the picture, unfortunately, because they flay. I scared them. And but they were perching. I didn't see any oviposition, but they were perching on the Micropus, paying no attention whatsoever to the Leptosiphon. So this is not a unique observation. In this part of the state, even though they have the opportunity to oviposit on Leptosiphon, they're not doing it. So a chart of the summary of that those two groups. Eldorada uses 2 species of Erythranthe, and that's the only known hosts for these. Before we started studying this, nobody knew this. But trigrapha, on the other hand, is unusual in the Adela in that it uses 4 different families of host plants in 3 different orders. Typically, Adelids worldwide have a very narrow range of plants that they will oviposit upon. So on to the next one, the flammusella. This is where I really started getting argumentative with the plant geneticists. Flammusella is probably the most common species in California, widespread. This is a typical phenotype of the male in a kind of a dryish habitat. And here's a male in a wetter habitat. And here's a male in a wet habitat. So you see they range from boldly spotted to immaculate, everything in between, and it correlates quite well with how wet the soil is in that area. They don't fly far from their hosts, so they're easy to study. They're easy to correlate with the plants because they just don't wander away from their plants. You find swarms of them and 20 or 30 feet away, none. Anyway, so the other member of this group so far is an unnamed species that uses Diplocus torii. And there's a female on the left, male on the right. She's not laying an egg there, but they're on the ovipositional substrate. A couple more pictures of the males of flammusella. Here it is on a tenuata. Female, that's a female story, but it's not laying an egg. Tenuata is a very common widespread plant, in case you don't know, valley tassels. And the moths are almost always found where there's a good patch of valley tassels in lower elevations. They have a limit of how high elevation they'll go, even not as high as the plant goes. Pictures of a tenuata. These are Castilleja now. They used to be Orthocarpus, they're owl's clovers. Lacera, a couple of pictures of Lacera, close and the whole plant. Linear aloba, which I sometimes find difficult to separate from attenuata, but this is what Calflora called these photos. I don't know where these photos are taken, but it does look like linear aloba as far as I know. They have long, narrow branches of their leaves. Densiflora, we found the moths closely associated with densiflora up on the mountain. They were not laying eggs, but it was cold and windy, and the moths were just sitting there not doing anything. Pretty much anywhere you find a good stand of owl's clovers, you will find flammusella. And here is one laying eggs on attenuata, another picture of the attenuata in Sacramento County. Orobancaceae now, used to be Scrophulariaceae. Here's one laying an egg on Lacera. You can see the arrow points to the barely visible little black line, which is the extension of the ovipositor beyond the bract. She's pierced through the bract and into the ovary with some space in between. So they're not just laying eggs on the surface or just barely below the surface. They're really piercing down in, and they're getting to the ovary. This is but Lacera tends to grow in wetter places than attenuata, and the moths tend to be less spotted where the Lacera is. Female laying an egg on Lacera, a male and a female on Castilleja attenuata. I don't know why I put that picture in there. Maybe just to indicate the males and the females. The females tend to be darker than the males and tend to have redder heads, and the antennae are obviously shorter in this group of the females. Is an antennae obviously shorter than the males are. The eyes are smaller. You can see a little beady eye there compared to this bigger eye in the male. Here's the female ovipositing on the attenuata. Oh, I'm sorry, linear a little bit, sorry, my bad. This looks like attenuata to me, but you guys don't have any attenuata listed for Hell's Half Acre. And that looks like a linear aloba to me. The moths were laying eggs on stuff, but I'm not sure what that plant is. This is I like this picture because you get a good idea of how big the eyes are here. Remember that, the big bulging eyes almost touching each other on the apex of the head. And that's flammusella. Flammusella here on popcorn flower, wet, dry. Okay, there are a few that often will fly beyond after the main flight of the moths is over, and we think that the reason there are a few of them flying later is because they were using a plant that is growing in wetter soil and then emerge as soon as the others. There seems to be a correlation that they're phenologically coupled with their hosts based upon soil moisture and maybe photoperiod. They have to fly when the flowers are blooming because they lay the eggs into the flower ovaries. So there has to be some coupling there. And we don't find them in numbers on Campestris as much as we find them on other species. We have not observed oviposition on Campestris, but Campestris grows in very wet places like the edges of vernal pools that are submerged in the spring. And so that might have something to do with that dynamic between the moths and the plants. In Europe, there have been late moths described as a second generation of of a species, but I don't believe that's the case. I think they're just seeing the same thing that we're seeing, a few late emergence. There's never been a species of Adela anywhere in the world demonstrated conclusively to have more than one generation a year. It's another interesting thing that Lisa discovered. She's really been very observant. We wondered if flammusella would utilize the butter and eggs, Triphyceria Erythranthe, because it's a common plant and it grows in thick patches. The moths are so common in the same general habitats, but search as we might, it was years before we ever could observe them to use this plant. Lo and behold, last year, like Lisa found some in a place, one place, ovipositing on that plant. There was no Castilleja present at that location, but Castilleja and Erythranthe can be found in close proximity, and they don't use it except for that one instance. So we don't really know why that's the case, but it's fun to discover it. Okay. I said I was going to get argumentative. Well, flammusella will use just about any species of Castilleja that was formerly in the genus formerly in the genus Orthocarpus, the house clovers. No species of Adela pays any attention whatsoever to species in Castilleja that were formerly in Castilleja, the paintbrushes. So think about that, and what does that tell you? A couple of plants that could be mistaken for Castilleja, but they're not, and the moths don't use them. Triphyceria versicolor, and then this alien weed. Not sure I could even pronounce this. Parentucella vicosa. It's not a Castilleja. Okay, up in Eldorada County, on Park Creek Road, I noticed that there were these moths in kind of two separate little bunches of moths close to each other. And I wondered why they weren't just just mingling around generally. And it turns out that we now believe that was my first hint that this is actually an undescribed species. It uses Diplodocus torii as a host plant. Here's a female laying an egg, and the flammusella just 10 feet away or so was using the typical attenuata, and they were not mingling with each other. They don't leave their plants. So this was the ecological plant association thing that was the first clue that this might be a different species. Since then, we've found morphological differences, this pale underside and smaller eyes and red heads in both sexes. They lack the golden or brassy sheen of flammusella. They are always, I've seen one specimen that has just the tiniest trace of a spot, even though they're in the dry areas where flammusella would be well spotted. These guys are, you'd have to really look to find a spot on them. So here's a picture of close Diplodocus torii. And then besides that, there is a moth that uses, apparently, we have not seen oviposition yet. In fact, we only found 2 populations of this moth, but apparently it uses Diplodocus californicus because it's closely associates with Diplodocus californicus. But since we haven't had much opportunity to really observe the moths, we haven't been yet able to see any oviposition. This moth and and the moth on the toriae is sympatric with flammusella, but there's no indication that there's any hybridization between them. Sympatric, I mean, found together in the same place. The one on the toriae and the californicus has not been, those two have not been found to be sympatric, even though there are both of those species in the general vicinity of each other, the species of the plants. Along the Caples Creek drainage, we found a population of this moth on the toriae that was a little different than the others. It had larger eyes. Let's see. Okay, there's the typical eye size, and here's the one with the somewhat larger eyes, but they were not quite as large as the flammusella eyes. We found that kind of interesting, didn't know what to make of it, but it does still seem to be the toriae moth, and they were on the toriae. Unfortunately, that population apparently doesn't exist anymore. The habitat burned up in the Caples Creek fire, and we have not, that particular spot was thoroughly burned, and we have not been able to find any moths in there since. Okay, so in summary, we have 9 species now. I'm waiting on the californicus until I have a better argument, but we can make a good case for this one being a good species. We have 9 species of Adela in California. And all but septentrionella has a close congener. Okay, so we have septentrionella as unique on Holodiscus. We have eldorada on Erythranthe, 2 species of Erythranthe, and trigrapha, with close related moths, on 4 different families and 3 different orders. So we think that this is actually a group of species, not just one species. They are using different things, even though they're closely related moths. Flammeusella and this other moth are using plants that used to be in the same family, but are not classified into the same family anymore. The moths are closely related, and they're using plants that used to be closely related. And thorpella and oplerella are closely related moths, and they're using the same plant. Singulella and punctiferella, oops, got them backwards. Singulella and punctiferella are closely related moths, and they're using 2 different pairs of species, both in the same genus. And then we have, that was then, now we have flammusella on the Orobanchaceae and this moth on the Frimmaceae, and those 2 are still in the same genus, of course, and these 2 are still in the same genus. But the moths used to be, the closely related moths used to be using the same plant family. Now it's different families. Think about that. Okay, I'm being a little inconsistent here now. This is not a known California species, but I wouldn't be surprised if it is found in California, because its host plant is not known, but it is in Arizona. I found the moth in 4 different locations, and they were consistently always on this plant, which is Burkhelia grandiflora. And the moth, I was there a month late, so I didn't really see as many moths as I probably would have if I had gotten there when I wanted to. But they were always on this plant, so that's probably the host. In Texas, this moth is, I didn't find them everywhere. The plant is very common, widespread, but I only found it in 4 different places. I suspect that this moth is a very common, widespread plant moth in its right time. It was described from southern Mexico. It's known from Texas. It's known from Arizona, and it's probably found somewhere in between. Calflora has pictures of this plant, and they call it Brickhellia grandiflora, the same name as this plant, which it doesn't look like the same thing to me, but this plant is a dead ringer for the photos in the book of Arizona plants. So I don't know if they're the same plant, and I don't know if that moth would use this plant, but if it does, it could be found in California. So if you guys are interested enough to go looking, we would love to help, and look for this little moth. It's a little smaller than flammusella, one of the smaller of the, but not the smallest in the genus. This is a female with a shorter antennae than the male, and I hope you guys find it and post it on iNaturalist or tell us somehow. So we've come to the end of some moths here. Spiders, especially crab spiders, seem to be the most prominent predators of the Adelids, and that kind of makes sense because crab spiders lay an ambush on the flowers until some victim comes by, and since the Adelids are very attracted to flowers, that it makes sense that spiders would get a lot of them. That's the end of the production. I hope that this encourages you to go out and observe these moths while you're botanizing. If once you get to know how to recognize them, you will find them. But you have to be looking for small insects. And I hope that we've been just really having a heck of a lot of fun with these guys. And if you start seeing them, I think you'll probably be just as delighted with them as we are. So I hope that happens. Thank you.
Well, thank you so very much, Al. That was fascinating. I had no idea what to expect, and I found myself going, well, oh, I could plant that, and maybe they would come to our property. Oh, I could plant that. Maybe they come to our property. And I bet that throughout, that across the people who are watching this, that's exactly what they'll think. How can I make the land that I work on more Adela moth friendly?
Yeah, you can do that. They're so common. They'll probably find the plants. I moved to Shingle Springs recently, and I found the moths within a quarter of a mile of my property there. It's not my property, but where I live. Lisa has them on her property. Before we started studying these things, we hardly ever saw them because we weren't looking for them. Now that we're looking for them, it's rare for us to go out and not find them. So I do encourage you to do this. You will be successful. I actually wrote up a little paper on how to be successful in finding these moths. I don't have it with me, but if anybody wants a copy of that, they can email me, or maybe I'll post it on the CNPS website or whatever. When I've been studying butterflies and moths all my life, and I rarely saw these Adelas until I started looking. Once I started looking, I rarely do not see them.
Oh, that is awesome. During what months of the year are they around in our area? I'm sure it varies by elevation, but
Yeah, it does. Thank you. That's I should have said that. March. This year's a little early year. They might be flying right now. I've been out and I've seen some flowers blooming, and I'm going to go looking to see if they're out yet. But late March is generally the first. And then the earlier species, they don't have a long flight period each by individual species. The earlier ones are done in a 2-3 weeks or a month, except for flammeusella. I think they don't probably live, any individual moth lives all that long, but they emerge over a period of time depending on the soil moisture.
mm-hmm.
Then septentrionella is a late flyer. It will fly into late June, I guess, and it doesn't start to fly until probably around mid or late May. So one species or another from late March to mid-June. The undescribed one on the toriae will go into June.
Well, that's great. Leslie has a couple of really interesting questions about the antennae
Yeah.
of the Adela moths. What does what purpose does having such really long antennae serve? And also, aren't these antennae different from the typical feather-like antennae of moths? And why do you think that might be?
We get this question all the time, and we don't have an answer for it. There's a physiological cost for having such long antennae. One, they break, and two, it takes energy to create them. It takes a special pupa to accommodate them as they're changing from caterpillar into moths. Typically, moth pupae have a casement for the antennae that is pressed to the thorax of the pupa, and these guys' antennal cases are pressed to the thorax, but they're too long. They're much longer than the thorax. So once that case that contains the antenna comes to the point where it joins the abdomen, it is separate from the surface of the abdomen and spirals around the abdomen, which is weird, but really, really delightful to discover that. Okay, so we have 4 hypotheses for what the moth is gaining by having these long antennae. One of the other costs is that they're a drag on a moth as it's flying through the air. These antennae stream behind the moth as the moth is flying, and you can actually see the antennae as well as you can see the moth, because they're white and they glisten in the sun. And so when you're out looking, you can sometimes the first thing I see is the antennae, and then all of a sudden my eyes click and then I see the whole moth. So it's an aerodynamic drag. So there's the cost. On the other hand, since they don't wander far from their hosts, how do they disperse? These antennae may be serving as sails. They might just be wind dispersed, and the antennae serve that purpose. Another advantage is that the longer the better. If the antennae are organs of smell, and they have little hairs and little pores on the antennae that detect the odors. And the longer the antennae, the more pores they can have, so the better their smell could be. Another hypothesis is that it's a tactile thing, and it's a defense. They hold their antennae up over their bodies when they're perched on and back over their wings when they're perched on the flowers or anything else for that matter. And the hypothesis is that it's a warning for them that when something touches their antennae, they know to just get out of there as fast as they can. We tried to test that, and we were not able to demonstrate it, but we haven't given up on that hypothesis yet. Another hypothesis is, what was the other one? Smell, tactile. I've forgotten what it is, sorry.
Well,
oh yeah, so the other hypothesis is these males make these little swarms. It's pretty common. Now you'll see a whole bunch of them all swarming together and near the host plant and all. Some people think that that's lek behavior. I disagree. I think it's a mistake. I think they have large eyes and they probably have pretty good eyesight for a moth, and the antennae are so conspicuous. I suspect that they're recognizing another of their kind and a potential female by these antennae. And since the antennae are at least as conspicuous as the moth, that would be an aid for them to find each other. And if they get lucky, it's a female.
Mm-hmm.
They don't, butterflies and moths can be territorial and aggressive towards each other and chase each other away, but they make these little swarms and they don't leave. They will swarm around for a while and then they'll all perch in the same vicinity. So they're not being aggressive. And they swarm even in the absence of the females. So I don't think it's a lek behavior, but they might be just searching and the antennae are helping them search.
Sounds great. Is it true that typically moths have feather-like antenna, or?
Oh, is that part of the question? No, that's a lot of moths have branched feathery antennae, but the majority of them have filiform antennae, and nowhere near as long as these adelids proportionally, but most moths have just a single thread antenna.
Okay, thank you. Ken Ichi asks a very interesting question that I've been wondering about myself. You've talked about the pairs of closely related species. And are there any theories as to why there are these pairs of closely related species?
They're just recently evolved. They haven't diverged yet. That's the hypothesis. And we call them closely related because they look like each other. And they used to use plants in the same families when that taxonomy was that way.
Mm. You mean, so when the taxonomic changes happened to the plants, it's like, wait, to just look at it on paper, you wouldn't think the plants were as closely related as one used to think before the plants changed.
What I'm trying to say is the moth relationships and the plant relationships before the geneticists changed things. Now,
yes,
the genetics is pretty darn important stuff. So maybe that is more accurate, but I'm trying to say is it's not the last word. That other considerations, ecological considerations, and just morphology should not be abandoned in trying to come up with a systematic system. So the moths used to be, the closely related moths in the old system used closely related plants. In the new botanical systematics, the closely related moths don't always use closely related plants anymore.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. The same audience member asks another question, and I think you've kind of talked about this, but maybe you'd elaborate a little bit. And that is, how far can these moths fly? And are there other ways that they might be distributed, wind or other, or on, you tell us.
I think they're quite capable of flying long distances. They fly for extended periods of time and frequently, then just perch briefly and then fly some more. But they don't wander. So I think they're capable, but they don't wander. And I suspect that they're dispersed by wind, either with the aid of the antennae or not. If the resources dry up in a particular area, they're probably more likely to disperse, as Lepidoptera are in general when that happens.
Okay, I'm going to ask her.
They are pretty good flyers. They're kind of awkward and they bob and stuff, but they're quite capable flyers.
Okay. I'm going to ask a really basic question, but I don't know the answer to this question because this is not something I know much about. Traditionally, I think of moths as being the Lepidoptera that fly at night. And yet clearly these are day flying moths.
Right.
Could you talk to that a little bit?
Well, in the first place, dividing the order Lepidoptera into moths and butterflies is not really justified as systematically. butterflies are one superfamily of moths, and in this order of Lepidoptera, consisting of many superfamilies of moths, butterflies being just one of them, and the placement of butterflies in the whole group is not at the end. So most moths do fly at night, but there are a lot of moths that fly in the daytime. The genus Adela is exclusively diurnal. Another genus in North America, Caucus, is kind of crepuscular, more shade loving and more active in dim light. There's another subfamily in the genus which has not been shown to exist yet in North America, but I have my suspicions that it does, and that subfamily is entirely nocturnal.
Well, okay. Thank you. I'm so glad. I'm so glad that you've been so generous with your questions. If people have any more questions, you can put them in the chat, or we're kind of going to wind this up in just a moment or two. To what extent, just while we wait to see if there are any more questions, this kind of pairing of the two species, is that done from a phenomenological point of view, or has there been any genetic work done to
I don't know.
to confirm that? Okay.
I don't know the answer to that question. That's my invention, to pair these up because they're closely similar. I think people would agree with me, but the genetics has been done on I don't know how many, maybe all of the species in California, but I don't know how deep that genetics has gone to actually establish phylogenetic relationships, or just to separate them one species from the next. We do have some genetic data on this Torii moth, in that it's 1.5% different than flammusella in the mitochondrial, certain region of the mitochondrial DNA. So that is another argument for why they're different. As far as like pairing them up by genetics, I don't know if that anybody's done that. I just think that makes it seems reasonable to me.
Okay. So a couple people have asked how they should email you photographs if they do get photographs of the Adela moths. Would you mind if I put your Gmail address in the chat and you shared that? What would you like? You can.
I can recite it to you right now.
Yeah, please do.
A Ludtke, ALUD as in David, T as in Tom, KE @gmail.com.
Okay.
And I would be delighted for any photographs that anybody wants to send me. I do my best to identify it. If you can provide some information about the plants that you found them on, so much the better.
And when you took the photo, because it may be that someone has a photo and they don't send it to you the very day that they take it. And
Right.
And also the location, not only the plant, what the plant is, but where you are. Where did you find this one? I'm sure that's helpful.
The date and location, it's all helpful. Some people are reluctant to provide precise locations because they're afraid someone will go out and collect them, and they don't want them to be collected. We still want to know, even if we're not going to go collect them, we still want to know about the distribution. So if you can give some kind of a general area, like what county they were in, or within 10 miles or so, so we can put dots on the map, that would be helpful. But precise location is even better, because then if there's something interesting about it, we can go look.
Right. Yes. If it's on a plant that is a relatively common plant, that's different from finding it on a plant that is rarely seen. So I think you're very right to bring up this point now.
If you could refer back on the YouTube to this talk, and I've mentioned all of the known or suspected plants for these individual moths. If you find these moths on some other plant, and even if you don't observe oviposition, but you find them congregating obviously on a particular plant, that would be really exciting for us to be able to add new host plants to the list.
That sounds great. I was thinking about Lisa, and this might be a question for her, or it might be a question for you. And that is, do either of you use iNaturalist a lot? And if so, do you have IDs or handles there so that we can find you there and look at what you're doing?
We do both use iNaturalist. I hardly ever post anything. Lisa has taken most of these photographs, and she posts them on iNaturalist. We both refer to iNaturalist, but particularly I refer to iNaturalist for just information from other people about the moths, and it's been a tremendous resource for us.
That sounds great. So Lisa, if you could put your iNaturalist handle in the chat, that would be great.
Is Lisa unmuted now?
No, she can't be unmuted, but she can type in the chat.
Yeah.
Oh, there it is. She put it in. Thank you so much, Lisa. Okay, so for those who, for some reason, are finding it challenging to look at chat, but we hope that won't be the case. And also, so people who watch this video later can find it. Her iNaturalist handle is LCOUPERDMV photo, PHOTO, all one set of letters. Oh, pardon me. Yes, I know. DVM, not DMV. Oh God, I pardon my language. Yes, I knew that it was about that she was a veterinarian, and yet I still said it wrong. So it is LCOUPERDVM PHOTO. Okay, thank you so much, Lisa. And if people have questions about the photos, they can reach out to Lisa that way or via Al and ask her, Lisa, your photos are just absolutely incredible. And I think we all look forward to seeing what the range of photos is that you post on Instagram. So thank you very much for being Al's partner in this. Woo.
Before I sign off, I want to make it clear that I've had fun with this. Thank you for allowing me to speak. And Lisa and I have had a ton of fun doing this together. I am very lucky to have Lisa participate, and she has become as enthusiastic about it as I am, which is far above what I expected. It's been a terrific team that we make.
Terrific. And for those who aren't looking at the chat at this exact moment in your lives, Lisa is also letting us know how she is on Facebook, and that is #NatureDaily365. And she also has given her email address, which is dvmcooper, COUPER, @gmail.com. So I really appreciate both of you being here tonight and all the effort that you put into learning about these moths and their host plants and sharing with all of us. And this has been a most enlightening presentation. Thank you so very much. If Shane or Jean has anything else to add, come on in. And if not, we'll say good night to everyone.
Well, I'm just joining in saying good night, and I enjoyed the presentation as well, and I'm glad you could join us. Thank you so much.
Okay. Good night, everyone.
Good night.